Hello everybody, my name is Embry. I'm going to be teaching you how I edited this particular image that you see on the background here today in Photoshop. So I am a little bit new. This is my very first recording, my very first time being on any sort of streaming platform. So if you will just give me a little bit of leeway, I am really excited about questions and comments. I'm going to be trying to move fairly slowly as we go along so that you guys can keep up. Please feel free to pause the video, rewind, do anything. And then if there's something that you're really confused about, just leave it a question in the comments and I would be happy to get back to you as soon as I possibly can. So without further ado, we're going to be getting into the Blackberry image editing. So you just double click on any one of your raw files. You always shoot raw. I'll do a video on that as well. Don't ever shoot JPEG. Just don't ever do it. But continuing on for right this moment, I'm clicking on the thumbnail. It's going to open up Camera Raw, which is a step before you get into Photoshop. You can edit everything like your white balance, all these other, lightness, brightness values. Really easy. I'll do a full video on that at some point, I'm sure. But for right now, I'm not going to touch any of that. I'm actually just going to go into this sharpening, or it's called the Detail tab. It is the third section in here when you're editing. So really, I just take the amount up to about 45. Your radius is going to be 1 point, somewhere around 1.1. It was already pretty much there. And then the detail around 13. So really, what I really like is to have these come down in kind of a descending order, from top to bottom, always going from right to left. Next thing I do is just click to open image. Pull this over. So the very first thing that I do is to duplicate that layer, and the reason I duplicate it is to give you a non-destructive editing layer to work on. And how I like to duplicate my layers is just by hitting Control or Command J. That is going to open up a whole new layer here. That is an exact copy of this one. Now I can go ahead and turn that off visually so you just don't see it. And I leave it alone. I just leave it there to do whatever it wants to do. Then after duplicating, the very next thing that I like to do with all of my images in my editing workflow is to hit the J key. The spot healing brush tool over here on your menu. So when you hit J, it's going to be opening this tool right here. So you can make it bigger or smaller by using the bracket keys. I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with this process, but for those of you who aren't, I'm going to go through it step by step. So when you go over an image like this and just kind of fill those areas in, it will just clean up any dust or anything or dirt or watermarks. These are actually little bits of the berries. I had been dropping them and throwing them around for a really long time. So they were getting a little bit old at this point. I'm actually going to have to fix some of those things as well. So there's really nothing terribly special about this. I am really retentive when it comes to having a really clean, smooth surface. So I go what most people would probably consider overboard on this process. So during this time, I'm literally just circling the things that I want, holding down the mouse to get a bigger area, and then just clicking away some of the smaller areas that I don't want to see there anymore. And it will do a pretty good job. This is just concrete, a little board that I made for shooting products on. If you'd like to see a video about how I made this little concrete board, it's really easy and very cost effective. I can do that. This channel is going to evolve, hopefully, as I grow and as you guys help me figure out what you're interested in, and I'd be happy to make any videos that you guys request. Another thing to think about when you're doing food photography or food editing is the whole goal, the entire goal of what you're trying to do is make what you've shot look like the juiciest or the freshest or the most appealing that it can possibly look. And if you got to do a little extra photoshopping to get some of these little, you know, broken areas back, there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, so another trick in these darker areas, if you can't quite see in there, you might be kind of obligated mentally to think that there's really nothing down there that you need to edit out with this J tool, but that can be very misleading. So what I like to do is when I've selected on whatever layer that I'm editing out, I'll hit the levels adjustment. But for this one, I'm just going to grab the gamma button, which is going to affect the blacks, and it'll slide it up into a gray area, just so you can see everything that's going down inside of here, which is really, really important. And then you can continue editing out, reselect your layer, continue editing out anything that you think might be distracting. Okay, so with an image like this, it would be really easy to go all day long with this clicking and editing, and I'm not really going to spend all that much time. You can go as crazy as you want with this process, but I feel pretty satisfied with this result right here. And that really, I spend the most time on it primarily because it's the longest part of this process. It takes the longest. And everything else pretty much is going to be a layer adjustment and things like that. So we can actually come back over here to this levels layer right here and just hit delete, and we'll bring us back to the original image that we have. Now we are going to be opening up other adjustment layers and manipulating different things like that. So the very first thing that I like to do is come up here, make another levels adjustment that I'm just going to be using temporarily. I always delete it and then open up a new one fresh just to make sure that I get back to 0 when I'm going. So in order to check your highlights on an image, it's really, really important in the levels adjustment to come up here to your brightness, or this is your highlight node right here. And if you hit Alt before you click on this, it will actually make your screen go black. So you hold both. You hold down Alt and then left click on your mouse, and you can actually slide this over until you start seeing these little dots. Now what these dots represent are pure blown out saturated areas of color, like either bright white or just pure bright white spots. So what I like to do is bring it forward just until I see the first pixel blow out. And you really don't want any blown out pictures in your image. And you also don't want any black pixels, like pure black sections in your image. And the main reason that you don't want that is for print. If you're going to be printing your image, you don't want any of those as well. So transversely, we will hold down Alt, click on the black, and you see that there are a bunch of, well, not too many. Actually, it's not as bad as I thought it was. These areas in here have gone to pitch black, but even in a print, these little bits of black probably wouldn't be that big of a deal, but you can get rid of them. So if you select your layer 1, again, open up a new levels adjustment, and what you can do is you can take up your gamma a little bit more until you start seeing some detail down in these areas here, just visually kind of turn that up. And then back on your first levels layer, you can come in and double check. See, the black areas have now moved over, and you'll hold down Alt, left click again, and slide that over until you see your first black pixel. This one's probably going to be chunks like we had before, so I'm going to back it off until we don't see any, which is around 9. And now you've got an image with no pure white blown out pixels and an image with no pure black pixels. I can actually, and you can just see the difference that this level has made here as well as that one. See how the blacks were just really, really muddy and really, really dark? Now you can see all the way through the image here, and there's light areas and darks with little chunks of black. Anyway, from there, I'm going to go onto this layer again, open up a levels adjustment. So one thing that I did to edit this image was I actually made this gray area darker so that these highlights and the gray areas and the actual berries stood out a little bit more. I really liked how that worked and how the image came out. So to do that, I'm actually going to just grab the middle one, which are your midtones, highlight midtones, and then your darks or blacks, whatever you want to call them, until you feel like you've got a good, better range. I'm going to hit B on the keyboard, which is going to open the brush tool. Again, if you hit the brackets up or down, you can change the size of your cursor or the affected brush area. If you hit D on your keyboard, it will actually change whatever colors you have in here back to black and white. If you hit the X key, it will change them back and forth between one another. And those are really, really good hotkeys to know when you're working with a layer mask. Now, I have a magic mouse, so there's a right click and a left click button. So I'm gonna go right click, and I'm actually going to increase the hardness to about 50%. About 50, there we go, 49, 50. Okay, and the opacity up here, I'm gonna bring to about 50%. Now, on my keyboard, it's set up to if I hit 5 while, doing a brush key, it'll bring me to 50%. You hit 1, 10%, 2 is 20, and so on and so forth. So I want about 50% opacity, so I will hit the 5 key on my number pad, and I can go ahead and start painting this mask here out. I can start painting the effects of this layer out of my image and the areas that I don't want it to be, because it made all of these areas go really, really, really dark. Now, I did set the layer here a little bit, maybe a little bit dark. I can adjust it later. I can adjust it later to suit whatever needs that I have. But for right now, I'm just gonna very, very quickly paint it out of all the areas that I know I don't want to be affected, which is basically this entire side here, because it gets pretty dark. Actually, on this chunk over here, I'm gonna hit 0 to bring the opacity of my brush tool to 100, because I really don't want any of this to be affected at all by that layer. Now you'll start noticing a little bit of a halo effect coming out around these berries, and I'm going to take out even the shadow areas on purpose because I can reblend those in a minute. It's a little bit easier to do it on the next step than it is on this one. So I will just go ahead, be very, very loose with this selection. Okay, so this was, it's intended to be very, very quick on this step. And you can see here this lightness value is actually getting to be really similar to this value. And that's really, really what I was going for. I didn't want it to fall so dark in this corner in comparison to what was happening out here. So another thing I will do is add actually, no, I'm going to go back to this mask. I'm going to hit X on my keyboard, and what that's going to do is switch this from black to white. Just hitting X will switch the two. And so now we'll be painting detail back into the image. Give me a little bit more softness around the edge. So in my opinion, I'm going to try to make this very clear that editing is very subjective, and any one thing that I do might just be horrible to someone else for whatever reason. They think differently than I do. That's fine. Yeah, this is my image and this is how I want to edit it. And my opinions about how things are edited are all my own. And so nothing, you really can't take anything other than experience or personal taste, or not even really taste, just experience in life. This is all your own. You do what you want to do with your photos, and you believe what you want to believe, and that's totally fine. I think that's a really good thing to have. Diversity when editing is concerned. But my main pet peeves when I see people or other people's images, or even mine when I didn't step back far enough, is that images that have halos around certain objects. You'll see it a lot on horizons with buildings and skies, because the sky will be blown out, so they'll have to take it down in post. But there will always just be this weird sort of halo that is kind of around or separating both the layers, and it's one of the most obvious editing things. You can tell when images have been heavily edited based on that halo. And so you really want to smooth these things out and make them seamless so that people don't know what you've done in editing. A really good editing job is one where people look at it and they don't think about anything but what is in the image and what the people are trying to say with that image. They don't want to think about the photographer. They don't want to think about the editing especially. You don't want to see that. You don't want it to be very heavy-handed. So right now I'm going to take my opacity down to like 3. I'm going to open my brush up, and I'm going to very slowly try to paint these shadows back in so that they're not totally gone to black, and just even them out and smooth them together like that, because it's really easy to make those go to totally dark black, and you don't want that. So we can just carefully paint these areas back in so that the halo disappears and you still have a defined shadow area. So now if you click the little eyeball here, it will hide your layer, and you can just see the difference that makes. It's really important to me personally to have that evenness, because now all of the highlights over here in these berries stand out a lot more than they do when it's like this. Right here, your eye is just bouncing all around this horrible gray concrete instead of looking over here on the beautiful blackberries. So from that point, I would typically come to your very top layer. Anytime you add a layer, it's actually just going to add it on top of whatever layer you have selected. So on this one, I want it to be at the top, so I'm going to select the top layer. I'm going to come down here, but click on solid color, and then right here we're going to select the blue. I like a little bit of a bluish green color, and this is all subjective, of course, and it doesn't have to be perfect from this, because what we're going to hit is in your blending options mode. We're going to come down to soft light, and you can see right away that makes such a huge difference in the visual effect of what's going on here. So if you double click on the color, it will actually allow you to keep changing this up. I want it to be a little bit brighter and a little bit grayer, because a little bit less saturated. If you move it over here, it'll saturate the color. Move it over here, it'll desaturate it. I like it to reside somewhere in between these two, because I want it to know that it's blue, but I don't want it to be hitting us over the head with it either. And it's a little dark, so you can lighten it. So right about there for now. Then we'll hit OK. Next thing I like to do is open up a hue and saturation layer. So when you added the color fill layer over here, it took out and added a whole bunch of blue to these red areas, and it made them look purple. And I prefer those to look more natural in my image, so I'm going to try and make them a little bit red. To do that, open up a hue saturation layer, come up to your color picker thing, which is a little hand icon here, and I'm going to select the closest, or the most relevant section of color here that you want. You can select it anywhere, but I chose this color right there. And you can come up and you can change them back and forth a little bit. Add saturation. That's way too much, but I just want to see the effect. With this, you can really push these. So right here, this is the color area that we have selected, and you can widen this and smooth it out a little bit, which I'm going to do because some of these were clipping like red here and then still being kind of gray. So I opened that up a little bit and tried to push them more over to the red area here. So that I'm actually getting pretty happy with. You can also use the lightness, but I found that it actually tends to gray it out a little bit. So the maximum that I would go is +7 on the lightness. So now you can see if you turn that layer off, it's really like a muted bluish purple, and turn it on, it turns a little bit more vibrant and a little bit more red. So on top of this layer, we're going to add another layer, or levels adjustment layer. Again, I'm going to hit Alt and click on this because we added so many layers that are doing so many different things. I can actually reset these brightness values and make them a whole lot brighter. Okay, so yeah, I just added a pop onto all of these brights. The black should still be perfect, or they're pretty much perfect, yeah. Just a little bit of black area. And then your midtones, I'm just gonna raise to 1.7. And I'm really that. However, this area got lighter again. So all I need to do is click the level that this one is on, and I'm gonna pull those back down. Just a little bit more. And then I can actually take this and paint it into this area because it got lighter again. With B, hit X on your keyboard to change that back. Or no, X to make it paint in. Opacity 2. Just do a quick paint in this area. Yeah, just help that sync. You got your light areas, your gray areas, and then a little bit darker back here. That's one thing I'll paint in. I like seeing all of these grays in here. I might make them just, I'll make them a pinch darker for fun. Okay, that's looking a little bit more natural now. Okay, the next thing I like to do, and this is a really fun trick when you're lighting, you can control what your lighting looks like a lot when you use gradients. Now, I really prefer using gradients on layers as opposed to trying to get these effects when I'm actually lighting the scene, because I know they do a really good job and they allow me a lot of creative control in post. So up here I just have one light and it's spilling down over it with like a really large softbox so that you get all of these little bubbles are really nice and soft and really well lit. But I knew when I was taking the photograph that I wanted to have these gradient overlays on. Okay, so good, it's not on there. Blend mode set to normal. Opacity, we can change that when we're going. Now, I believe the only thing really wrong with this is the angle. I like to have it set up like this. 2 blacks on the bottoms, one of the opacity sliders set up to 100. The other opacity slider here actually needs to come down to 0. This was a different image that I was editing. Okay, so you have 0, 100 opacity, and 2 blacks. Hit OK. Set this to the angle that you want, and then you can go ahead and pull it on the actual image to the area that you want it to be reflected in. And then hit OK. So I really like this gradient and how that's working, so all I have to do is hit the plus and it will duplicate it. So when I go down to the new layer that is also selected, we can switch it to the other side and then pull it off, you'll get a good representation of where it's at and what you're manipulating over here in your little cube. So I can do this. I'm gonna make this one a little bit smaller. And then the angle a little bit higher. And pull it back a pinch like this. Really what I want is just manipulating these to give me this beam that spreads through the middle and a little piece of light that comes right through the berries like this. So this is getting really close. I pull that back just a hair, give a little bit more light on the tip of this berry here. Okay. And now you've got your gradient on, and you can turn that on so you can see what you've done. And then you can turn it back off and you can see how much moodier and how much more specific, and your eye goes right to this berry now. It's a really good thing in product photography to zero, you really determine where the people's eyes need to go in the image, and I'm really happy that it kind of goes straight through here now. Okay, so I am actually just about done editing this image at this point. So we can come up here and I'm going to select all the layers. So you select the bottom or the top layer, doesn't matter, and then hit shift and click, and it will select all of the images or all of the layers together. And then what I like to do is hit Command G, and that will put them into a group here, like this. Right. Okay, and that way you can see where you started. Oh, I'm sorry. Turn the visual of that on. You can see where the image started. That's what it looked like before, and that's what it looks like now. So what I'm going to do also is turn this back to white, and I'm going to go into View, Screen Mode, Full Screen Mode, so that I can really see. I can really see the image and what's going on. So when you're editing in full screen mode, you can come over here. I can even, just for fun, I can even add another levels adjustment. Hit Alt, click on this. There we go, yeah, see, some of them came back out. Every layer and everything that you adjust is going to affect your brightness values. And I just want to make sure that they stay as crisp and as bright as they can. Black areas are still good. They're not totally grayed out or blacked out. And you do want a little bit of black in your image to add contrast, so I'm a little bit more forgiving on the blacks than I am in the lights. So, alright, there you have it. Here is the before, and here is the after. Alright guys, that's the video. I really appreciate you watching all the way to this point. If you had any questions or I skipped over something too quickly, please leave it in the comments below. As always, it would really help. This is my first video and I'm trying to grow the channel, so if you would hit the like and subscribe button, I would really appreciate it. Also consider hitting the little bell icon, and that way you'll get notified every time I post a new video. I really appreciate you guys very much, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.